I hadn't seen my dad in years. Not because of any bad blood, but life just happened. College, work, relationships. Everything piled up, and before I knew it, time had slipped away. But something in me needed to see him again. Maybe it was nostalgia, maybe guilt. Either way, I decided to visit his house unannounced. The drive there felt longer than it should have. My hands gripped the wheel a little too tightly, heart pounding against my ribs. I didn't even know if he'd be home, but I told myself it didn't matter. I'd just show up, knock, and hope for the best. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same, almost untouched by time. The porch light flickered slightly, casting an eerie glow against the evening sky. Taking a deep breath, I walked up and knocked. A few seconds later, the door creaked open, and there he was. He looked different. Older, of course, but there was something else. A hesitation in his eyes. He forced a smile, but his body tensed for just a fraction of a second. Then, as if flipping a switch, he pulled me into a hug. "Hey kid. It's been a while." His voice was warm, but there was an edge to it, like he was caught off guard. He stepped aside, letting me in, and I took in the familiar surroundings. The living room smelled like old books and coffee, just like I remembered. But something felt off. I tried to shake it off as I sat down on the couch. He sat across from me, rubbing his hands together, a nervous habit I recognized from my childhood. "What brings you here?" he asked, forcing a casual tone. Shrugged. "Just wanted to see you. It's been too long." His smile was tight. "Yeah, it has." Silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. He glanced toward the hallway, just for a second, but I caught it. It was quick, almost unnoticeable, but enough to make my stomach twist. And then I heard it. The faintest shuffle of movement. Someone else was here. Before I could ask, a voice called out, hesitant and unsure. "Is everything okay?" I turned my head, and there she was. A woman, standing at the hallway entrance. She looked younger than my dad, but not by much. Dark hair, soft features, and eyes that flickered between me and him with an expression I couldn't quite place. I felt my throat tighten. He cleared his throat, standing up too quickly. This is Claire." Claire. Not a name I recognized. Not someone I had ever heard of before. She gave me a small, almost apologetic smile and stepped forward, wiping her hands on her jeans like she was nervous. You must be my kid," my dad interrupted. Something about the way he said it made my stomach churn. Why did he cut her off like that? Why did she look so uneasy? I forced a polite nod, but my mind was racing. Who was she? Friend? A girlfriend? And why had he never mentioned her? Dad motioned for her to sit, but she hesitated. Then, after a beat, she lowered herself onto the couch, hands folded in her lap. The air in the room had shifted, tense, suffocating. I swallowed hard. "So, how do you two know each other?" Dad shifted uncomfortably. We've known each other for a while." Not an answer. Claire glanced at him, then at me. Her lips parted like she wanted to say something, but she didn't. Instead, she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and gave a tight-lipped smile. My gut screamed that something was wrong. The next few minutes passed in strained small talk. I asked about work, about life, about anything that would fill the awkward silence. But every time Claire spoke, Dad looked at her in a way that made my skin crawl. It wasn't just affection, it was something else. Something deeper. And then I saw it. A tiny gesture, barely noticeable. His hand brushed against hers on the couch. Not in an accidental way. In a way that was familiar. Intimate. My chest tightened. I wasn't stupid. I knew what that meant. Claire must have realized it too, because she pulled her hand back quickly, clearing her throat and shifting in her seat. Dad exhaled sharply, like he was frustrated. I felt my stomach churn. This wasn't just some woman. She was someone important to him. Someone close. And he was hiding it. I wanted to ask. I wanted to demand answers. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I sat there pretending everything was fine, while my mind pieced together the truth. And I had a terrible feeling I wasn't going to like what I found. Claire excused herself to the kitchen, and I watched her disappear down the hall. My dad shifted uncomfortably, rubbing his hands together like he always did when he was anxious. The air between us felt heavier now, thick with something unspoken. "You never mentioned her," I said, keeping my tone even. He exhaled through his nose, forcing a chuckle. "Didn't think it was important." I arched an eyebrow. "Didn't think it was important to tell your own kid that you were seeing someone?" His jaw clenched. "It's complicated." There it was. That phrase. A classic way of saying, "I don't want to tell you the truth." Before I could press him, Claire returned, setting down a tray with coffee. She avoided eye contact as she handed me a cup. Her hands trembled slightly. "Thanks," I muttered, taking it. I wasn't even sure I wanted it. The silence dragged on, stretching into something unbearable. Claire sat next to my dad, her body angled slightly away from him. She looked like she wanted to be anywhere but here. "How long have you two been together?" finally asked. Dad stiffened. Claire hesitated before answering. "A while." "While." No specifics. No clarity. My stomach twisted. I set my cup down, my patience thinning. "What does a while mean? Months? Years?" Dad let out a sharp breath, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, I don't think we need to." Claire cut him off. 2 years. My head snapped toward her. Dad turned sharply, his expression unreadable. "Claire." She shook her head. "They deserve to know." 2 years. I blinked, trying to process it. My parents had only split a year ago. My pulse pounded in my ears. "Wait. 2 years. But you and Mom." Dad swallowed hard, looking away. The realization hit me like a freight train. I shot up from the couch. "You were with her while you were still with Mom." Dad didn't answer. Claire stared at the floor. The silence was enough. My heart raced. My mind reeled. Felt sick. "She didn't know, did she?" My voice was barely above a whisper. Dad finally met my gaze, his face full of something that almost looked like guilt. "It wasn't." "Don't," I snapped. "Don't try to spin this." Claire's hands twisted together in her lap. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this." I turned on her. "You didn't mean for it to happen. You were sleeping with a married man." She flinched like I had slapped her. I don't care," I cut her off. "I don't care what excuses you have. You knew." Dad stood, his hands raised slightly, as if trying to calm me down. "Listen, I never wanted you to find out like this." I let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, so you were planning to tell me eventually? What, on your wedding day? Or were you just going to pretend she was some random woman you met after the divorce?" He sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "It's not that simple." "It is," I shot back. "You cheated, Mum, for 2 years." Claire inhaled sharply, blinking rapidly. Maybe she wanted me to feel sorry for her, but I couldn't. I turned back to my dad. "Does she even know?" He hesitated. That was all the answer I needed. I let out a humorless chuckle. "Unbelievable." Dad took a step forward. "I was going to tell her. Eventually." "Eventually." My voice rose. "You had 2 years. You had a whole marriage to tell her. But you just kept lying." Claire finally spoke, her voice small. "It wasn't just about lying." I shot her a sharp look. "Then what was it about?" She swallowed hard. "It was feelings. We didn't mean to fall for each other." I laughed coldly. "Right. Because feelings make it okay to betray someone." Dad exhaled. "You don't understand." "I don't understand." Snap. "I understand perfectly. You wanted to have it both ways. You wanted Mom's loyalty and Claire's, whatever this is." Claire looked away. Dad's expression hardened. "It's not that black and white." "It is," I countered. "You chose to lie. You chose to cheat. And now you want to justify it." His jaw tightened. You don't know what our marriage was like. Scoff. So what? Instead of working on it or leaving, you just found someone else. His silence was damning. I let out a shaky breath, my chest tight. You destroyed everything. And for what? Claire shifted. We're happy. My stomach turned. Happy? You think that makes this okay? Dad ran a hand down his face. I didn't want to hurt you. I stared at him, feeling something inside me crack. Well, you did. The room felt smaller, the air suffocating. I needed to get out. To breathe. Dad reached out. Please, let's talk about this. I took a step back. I have nothing else to say. Claire looked down, and for a second I thought I saw regret in her eyes. But I didn't care. I turned and walked toward the door, my heart pounding. Behind me, Dad's voice wavered. I love you, kid. I hesitated, gripping the doorknob. But I didn't turn around. Instead, I stepped outside, letting the door close behind me. The night air was cold, biting against my skin. But it wasn't nearly as chilling as the truth I had just uncovered. I didn't make it far before I heard the door open behind me. My dad's voice cut through the night air, sharp and desperate. Wait. Kept walking. I didn't trust myself to stop. If I did, I might say something I couldn't take back. But his footsteps followed, fast and urgent. Please don't walk away. I clenched my jaw, inhaling through my nose. My entire body was buzzing with anger, betrayal, something too big to name. I turned around sharply, forcing myself to meet his gaze. Give me one reason, I said, voice low. One good reason why I should stay and listen to anything you have to say. His face was tight. His hands balled into fists at his sides. He opened his mouth, hesitated, then exhaled. Because I'm still your father. I laughed bitterly. Right. My father. The one who spent 2 years lying to me. Lying to Mom. Sneaking around like some pathetic. I stopped myself, shaking my head. You don't get to pull that card now. His jaw twitched. I never wanted to hurt you. You keep saying that like it means something, I snapped. Like it changes what you did. He ran a hand through his hair, looking at the ground. You don't know what it was like. Scoff. Oh, I'm so sorry. Was it hard? Was it difficult for you, sneaking around, lying to your family? I took a step closer, my voice sharp as glass. Did you ever feel guilty? Even once? His silence was loud enough. I swallowed hard, my throat burning. When did it start? He sighed, rubbing his temples. Does it matter? Yes. My voice was steel. I need to hear you say it. He hesitated. Then finally, before the divorce. Punch to the gut. Already knew, of course. The timeline didn't add up otherwise. But hearing him admit it made it real. I exhaled shakily, willing my hands to stay steady. Did Mom know? His face twisted. No. My stomach turned. And you never planned on telling her, did you? He didn't answer. I let out a humorless chuckle. Of course not. Because then you wouldn't have had both. His head snapped up, eyes flashing. It wasn't like that. It was like that, I shot back. You had Mom at home, trusting you, and Claire on the side, making you feel wanted. I shook my head. And you didn't even have the decency to end things before moving on. His nostrils flared. It wasn't just about sex. I finished for him. Yeah, sure. Let's pretend it was some deep emotional connection instead. I crossed my arms. Because that makes it so much better. His eyes darkened. You're acting like this is black and white. Like your mother and I didn't have our own problems. I stared at him. So what? That gave you permission to cheat. He flinched but recovered quickly. Relationships are complicated. No, I snapped. Lying is complicated. Hurting people is complicated. But being faithful isn't. His mouth opened then closed. I let the silence stretch, watching him struggle to find something, anything, to justify what he did. Nothing came. A bitter taste filled my mouth. Wow, I muttered. You really have nothing, do you? He sighed, pressing his fingers to his forehead like he was the one with a headache. What do you want me to say? The truth, I said simply. Not excuses. Not justifications. The truth. His shoulders slumped. I fell in love with her. A cold weight settled in my chest. I should have expected it. Think I did. But hearing it still felt like a knife to the ribs. He must have seen something on my face because his expression softened. I didn't plan for it to happen. I let out a slow breath. That doesn't make it okay. He nodded, looking away. I know. Silence wrapped around us, thick and suffocating. For a split second, I thought I saw regret in his eyes. Not for falling in love with Claire, but for everything else. It wasn't enough. I swallowed past the lump in my throat. Does Mom know now? His Adam's apple bobbed. No. I closed my eyes for a second, then opened them. Are you going to tell her? He didn't answer right away. Then finally, I don't know. A slow exhale left my lips. Right. He took a step forward. Listen, I don't care. My voice was quiet but firm. I don't care what you have to say anymore. His expression cracked just for a second. But I didn't let it affect me. I can't stop you from lying to her, I said, voice steady. But I don't have to be part of it. His eyes widened slightly. What does that mean? I shook my head. Figure it out. I turned, starting to walk away again. This time he didn't follow. His voice came softer now. I don't want to lose you. Paused just for a second. Then, without looking back, I said the only thing I could. You already did. I didn't go home right away. I drove aimlessly, the city lights blurring past me, my mind tangled in too many thoughts at once. I felt hollow, like something inside me had cracked open, spilling out everything I thought I knew about my father. At some point, I parked in a random lot, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. The conversation kept replaying in my head. His excuses, his deflections, his refusal to admit what he had done until there was no way around it. I didn't know what I had expected when I showed up at his house. Some kind of warm reunion. A father who had missed me. Instead, I walked straight into a lie that had been festering for years. And now I had to decide what to do with it. I pulled out my phone, staring at my mother's number. My thumb hovered over the call button. She didn't know. She still thought the divorce was about growing apart, about irreconcilable differences. But it wasn't. It was about betrayal. Would telling her change anything? Would it help her or just reopen wounds she had already started to heal? I set the phone down, exhaling. This wasn't my burden to carry, but somehow it still felt like it was crushing me. My father had made his choices. He had chosen to lie. Cheat. To betray. And now he was choosing to live in that lie, hoping it would stay buried. But I couldn't pretend. I started the car again, my decision solidifying with each mile I put between myself and that house. I wasn't going to be part of his deception. If he wanted to keep living in his carefully crafted story, fine. But I refused to be complicit in it. I didn't know if I would ever look at him the same way again. Maybe time would soften the anger, dull the pain, make the betrayal feel less raw. But the damage was done. The man I had once looked up to had been replaced by someone else, someone I wasn't sure I wanted in my life anymore. By the time I reached home, exhaustion had settled deep in my bones. But I wasn't just tired, I was done. Done trying to make sense of his choices. Done carrying the weight of his mistakes. I walked inside, locked the door behind me, and let out a long breath. For the first time all night I felt something close to peace. Because I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't the one who had lost something tonight. He was.